Hello, my name is Edmund DeMarsh. I'm with Larry Johnson, the former CIA analyst, and from Sonar 21. Larry, thank you for joining us today at the Trends Journal.
Oh man, tried to wear out my welcome last time. You still had me back. Oh boy, they're calling to question your judgment.
We're glad to have you, especially on all the news happening with the UN General Assembly and Donald Trump. So I can't think of a better person to shoot some questions off, bounce some questions off,
Yeah.
than you. And it starts from what I've seen. We did a story a week ago on how General Kellogg, he gave a small conference, and he talked about how Russia's really afraid of the U.S. military. And he said if it ever came to blows, at least in a conventional sense, the U.S. military could kick Russia's ass. And I thought that was a one of. But now we have Donald Trump calling Russia a potential paper tiger, its military. Yeah. And that not only does he think Ukraine could win back all of its land that Russia took in this military in the invasion, but he thinks that Ukraine may be able to even extend further. And he hinted at taking Russian land.
Yeah.
So what is going on, Larry? You mentioned in Sonar 21, it appears Trump, this is sonar21.com, it appears that Trump is opting for the crazy like a fox strategy, but he's doing it in a clumsy, crass manner, in your opinion. You wrote about his Truth Social post, and he said, and you wrote, instead of failing on the battlefield, the Russians are steadily advancing and inflicting heavy casualties on Ukraine all along the line of conflict. So Larry, it seems like we're getting one thing from Trump, and the realities on the ground is completely different.
Yeah, so I'm going to demonstrate why I didn't last long at State Department, my lack of diplomatic skill. How Keith Kellogg could say something so abjectly, demonstrably stupid is beyond me, but he's not the only one. It's like a Greek chorus with David Petraeus, former general, does it, retired General Ben Hodges, retired General Mark Kimmett, retired Admiral Stavridis. All were in some form or fashion in charge of the U.S. European Command. And so let's start with Russia's a paper tiger. Boy, we, the United States, would kick their ass in a heartbeat. Really? How did we do against the Houthis? I mean, the Houthis, they're like, a 20th the size of the Russian military. They're years behind the Russians in terms of technology. They don't have the hypersonic missiles that Russia does, nor the tank production, nor the artillery production. And yet somehow those crafty Houthis kicked our ass. They defeated a U.S. carrier task force with destroyers and cruisers, forced them to retreat from the Red Sea, and we haven't gone back. Now, what Trump did in that case was, hey, the Houthis capitulated. We win, so we're pulling out. Yeah, that worked out well. Or how did the U.S. Army do against the Taliban? 20 years. And we lost. Again, an ass kicking from the Taliban. And people, they didn't kick our ass. We just didn't try hard enough. Oh, please. For God's sake, we had every military advantage in terms of technology, weapon systems, intelligence, trained personnel. And yet the Taliban, with no Air Force, no rotary wing aircraft, that means no helicopters, no Navy, no artillery, no tanks, no regular armies of any sort, not only fought us to a standstill, but forced us to retreat from the country. So I don't want to hear another American general, active duty or retired, open their mouth about anything pertaining to Russia's military capability or competence, because we don't have room to talk. Our own record in the United States, if people will sit back and just look at it objectively, we have not won a war against anybody with any kind of credible military force since World War II. And even then, the victory in Europe came thanks to the Soviets. We were bit players in that war. And even in the war in the Pacific, the Chinese army that was supplied, in fact, by the Soviet Union kept the Japanese, 70% of the Japanese army tied up on the mainland. So we fought 30% of the Japanese army in the Pacific. And so, but not since World War II could we take a real victory. Okay, yeah, we won in Grenada, but they didn't have an army. They barely had a police force. So you get this kind of ridiculous military argument. Oh, they're a paper tiger. It's that kind of stupid talk that gets you a bloody nose.
Lindsey Graham was on Fox News last night, and he seemed like he could barely contain his excitement about Trump coming out so strongly against Russia. And Graham actually said similar comments about the military, and he actually told Ukraine that you could have the U.S. most advanced weapons as long as NATO buys these weapons. And he goes, Trump's different than Biden because he's taking off all restrictions for Ukraine to use these weapons. That's what Graham said. I don't know if that's policy right now.
Yeah.
So do the neocons in Washington have Trump's ear? Or is this Trump just being a neocon pretending that he's not? What's your take on who has Trump's ear in D.C.?
Yeah, Trump, despite all of his tough talk and his bravado, he's a weak one to sit there and the set to he had with Zelensky back in February was sort of a characteristic of him. What we saw yesterday with him offering to put suntan lotion on Zelensky's ass was more typical Trump, where he wants to be liked. And so yeah, he's saying the words that, oh yeah, boy, we're solidly with Ukraine. In fact, Ukraine, man, go ahead and take back all that territory and keep going take Moscow and go invade Russia. When I saw that part, coupled with the other part where he said, oh yeah, man, you can have any weapon system, whatever NATO buys from us, they can give to you. Keith Bart being NATO's got to buy it from us, which presupposes that we could actually produce it and have something to give or sell to NATO, which is a whole different question, which we don't. So when I saw that, I thought, and then we had the event at the UN Security Council later in the day, where the three European musketeers, Germany, France, UK, along with their head cheerleader from Ukraine, Zelensky, put forth a resolution to the UN Security Council that was going to say, hey, Russia's bad. Russia is wrong. They've broken international law. They need to be punished. They need to be ostracized. They need to be sanctioned. This very anti-Russian. And the United States representative, acting on orders of Donald Trump and Marco Rubio, said, "Niet, no, we're not supporting that." And the Europeans and Zelensky are like, "Oh, what? What? But Trump just said." Yeah, so that tells me Trump was trolling. Because if Trump had actually meant what he said, then the U.S. would have taken that action in the UN and fully backed that resolution, which would have pitted the United States against Russia and would have told Russia that Trump's not to be trusted. Now, I think Trump's actions, where he got again suckered into backing the Israeli attack on Doha 2 weeks ago, factors into Russian considerations, because they recognize here was the United States who betrayed Qatar. They had given assurances, they had negotiated, they made promises, and they broke them in just a snap of the fingers. So Russia's got to sit there and calculate, we really can't trust anything Donald Trump says. All we can do is trust and see what he does. And so when they step back, I think they ignored the rhetoric of that meeting that he had with Zelensky and the truth he put out on his Truth Social network later, and watched what he did at the UN, where he said, no, we're not going to support that anti-Russian resolution.
Yeah, you mentioned that. So where exactly do we go from here? You have Trump mentioning that NATO has the right to shoot down Russian planes over its territory, and Poland, I think their foreign minister Radik, I'm forgetting the last name, came out and he celebrated that call from Trump, even though I don't know what's changed.
You mean Sikorsky?
Sikorsky, yes, married to Anne Applebaum. Yeah.
Radoski Sikorsky.
He's the one who celebrated the Nord Stream bombing, and he said thanks to U.S.
Yeah.
And so he comes out and he says, "Oh, this is like exciting news. Trump's giving the green light to shoot down Russian planes over NATO." And then I don't know if it was true, but I've read something that Putin said, "Yeah, if these planes are shot down, if they better land in NATO territory, meaning you better not be shooting into Ukraine or into Russia to knock down these planes." So is that in and of itself an escalation for Trump to say, or has that just been NATO policy? And don't countries have the right to shoot down warplanes?
Yes. If a warplane is in their territory. So if the Russians fly into Ukraine, they can be shot down in Ukraine. But the Russians are not flying. All of this is an attempt to manufacture an incident to provide a provocation that will create a war that will bring the United States into a war. Because the Europeans know they can't fight a war with Russia. They will definitely lose. But the reality is, even if the United States gets involved, it's not capable of fighting and winning a war with Russia. Not at all. Well, Russia has the potential to do damage to us in ways that we have never experienced in the history of our country, including the Brits marching into Washington, D.C. and burning down the White House. Russia has exercised great patience and great forbearance up to this point, because even as Robert Kagan, the king of the neocons, wrote earlier this week or late last week, citing that, in fact, the kind of actions the West has taken in terms of providing weapons and intelligence and military assistance to Ukraine under international law makes us co-belligerents, and Russia would be fully, in his words, not mine, fully entitled under international law to retaliate, to attack us. Russia hasn't done so up to this point, but what's going on in the Baltics, with both the rhetoric, the false claims, the claims that Russian drones were attacking Oslo and Copenhagen. I mean, please, it's just ridiculous. But they're using that to try to spark a confrontation with Russia, escalate it into actual violence to then create a casus belli to attack Russia.
Larry, can you talk to me very briefly about what a war would look like and how that could develop between the U.S.? I know a lot needs to happen before the U.S. gets into a shooting war with Russia. So let's say, for example, there's an escalation and gunshots or missiles exchange between countries. Can you just give your idea of how that escalation could look potentially? Like, would it be how would that escalate? I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, if let's say that a Russian aircraft is shot at and or shot down, or a Russian ship in the Baltic is attacked and even attacked and sunk, then at that point, the country that is involved with that attack on Russian forces, they would face immediate retaliation with Iskander or Kinsal or even Oreshnik missiles. And they would probably go after a key military facility. And then, Russia would not escalate to a point, but they would retaliate. Then the ball would be back in NATO's court, see what they were going to do. So if NATO then decided, the issue of the declaration of war against Russia, then I think at that point, Russia will take the gloves off. That's what people don't understand. They say, well, Russia's not, they don't know how to fight. They've not been fighting a war, because a war would entail, number one, they would immediately take out the satellite system, the intelligence systems that enable U.S. military communications around the world. They'd take that out, and they would blind the United States in terms of being able to look down and see what the Russians are doing, number one. They would be prepared to launch both hypersonic missiles and, if necessary, nuclear missiles onto U.S. territory. So, I mean, this could get out of control very, very quickly. And it's not the Russians' first option, but, the problem, we're like, America now is like that drunk guy at the bar that has been way too overserved, and his finger poking the guy next to him, thinks, yeah, he's nothing. It doesn't realize that he's a professional MMA fighter. And, the professional MMA fighter tries to ignore this guy, tries to, get him away, tries to defuse it. But finally comes a point where he gets finger pointed one too many times, and he turns around and mops the floor with the guy. That's what the United States is going to face. We think we are so potent militarily, but I've used the crude analogy. We're the 90-year-old guy with erectile dysfunction, thinking that we're going to take a 20-year-old bride and operate like we were when we were in our 20s. Ain't gonna happen. We're gonna find out the true meaning of military impotence.
Now, if we could move on from Ukraine, which seems like a mess, to Gaza, which also seems like a mess. And we had the UN General Assembly, and really there seems to be no breakthroughs in that. More countries came out to support a two-state solution, although even Israel laughs off these declarations as nothing, as meaningless, because they keep erecting new settlements in the West Bank, and they keep rolling in Gaza. What do you see? Do you see Arab countries losing a little patience here after, especially that attack in Doha by Israel? Did you notice any kind of a shift in their posture towards what Israel's doing in the region?
Yeah, there's certainly a shift in the rhetoric, and we're seeing several things that have taken place. One, Pakistan signed a mutual defense pact providing a nuclear umbrella for Saudi Arabia. So now that was in the works before the attack on Doha, but its announcement shortly after that attack in Doha was, I think, intended to send a very clear signal that Saudi Arabia is no longer content to rely solely upon the United States, and is in fact going to start distancing itself from the United States. You saw Egypt meeting with President Pezeshkian of Iran. President Sisi announced that Egypt and Iran would be restoring normal diplomatic relations, something that they've been not in a relationship for 34 years. You had Mohammed bin Salman, again, of Saudi Arabia, meeting with Pezeshkian. You had even the King of Jordan, Abdullah, there at that meeting of the Arab Islamic countries. That was a week ago Monday. And he announced that he was going to renew conscription into the Jordanian army. Well, that tells me that from his standpoint, he's recognizing Jordan's likely to be in a ground war, and that's going to be a war with Israel. So he's starting to beef up. There are Alistair Crook's wife, Aisling, does an excellent job of combing through both the Arabic and the Hebrew press, and she posted an interesting summary at his Substack. And when you go through that, you see that there has been a decided shift in the attitudes across the Arab Islamic states. Increased anger at Israel, less willingness to participate in an Abraham Accord, a more willingness to look at ways that they can take action. And we even saw last week at the UN Security Council, the United States, who normally endorses everything Israel does. They could be raping children, and the United States will say, well, that's sort of okay with us. Last week, the United States signed on to a resolution condemning the attack on Doha, because I think the U.S. recognized they had gone too far in supporting that attack and were at risk of losing access to the base at Al Udeid. So even there, the United States went along with everybody else on the Security Council and endorsed that resolution. It didn't name Israel by name, but that's who it was about. Everybody, we condemn the country that launched attacks on Doha, not saying their name, Israel.
How bad is the U.S.'s relationship with Israel and the support for what Israel is doing in Gaza and in the region? What's the impact on the U.S. reputation worldwide, in your view, and even in the region? What kind of damage is this doing?
Yeah, there's an argument out there between my friends. I think Doug McGregor thinks that the United States is calling all the shots with respect to Iran. I think Alex Craner believes the opposite. Um, and I'm sort of in the camp where I think the Trump administration is largely controlled, manipulated, and directed by Israel, and we continue to. But it's this is a mutually psychotic relationship. Um, so I don't want to imply that uh, Trump is being compelled to do things that he really doesn't want to do, because he sort of goes along with it. And we've seen we can't blame Israel as being the one who like to go out and kill people because of we think they're bad, or we want to label them as a terrorist or a drug trafficker, because the United States has been doing that as long as Israel has. And we've seen again Donald Trump in just the last 2 weeks, these illegal criminal attacks on these boats coming out of Venezuela or coming out of the Dominican Republic. Absolutely illegal under international law. It'd be illegal in the United States. If just think about this, if you had a local sheriff's department, and we got some lakes and some some ports here in Florida, and then they decide that this boat is trafficking drugs, and they just go out and riddle it with bullets or drop a bomb on it and kill all the people. You can't do that. That wouldn't be allowed in the United States.
Well, Trump said that he saw the cocaine fall off the boat into the water after it was bombed. He said you could see. I mean, this is the evidence that we're talking about here.
He's a liar. And let's assume they had cocaine or fentanyl on board. Number one, it ignores the fact that the largest trafficking of drugs comes out of Mexico into the United States and then out of Colombia, not Venezuela. Dominican Republic, too, is a major pipeline. But let's assume that there were drugs on board. Stop the boat, seize the drugs, arrest the people, and then get intelligence to find out who do they work for? Where's the money going? And one of the big reasons the United States never gets very far in these drug investigations is so much of the money is tied up in and being handled by U.S. banks and U.S. corporations. Corporations as mundane as John Deere is one. Nike, Under Armour. Just you find a product, Apple phones. There's drug money involved with it. Because they got the drug traffickers, they have so much cash that the only way they can convert that cash usually is to buy products that they can then sell to create the illusion that their money, their income came from these products that they've sold. So, but this all goes back to Israel. Israel killing people because it can, and now in this case, the United States is literally endangered its relationship with the entire Arab Islamic world there, in particular at the Gulf Arabs. So, Trump, that's one of the things he's doing in New York City today, trying to meet with these people, trying to see if he can repair the damage, and convince them, oh, we didn't know those Israelis, you know how they are. They're liars. They lied to us. He'll say that kind of stuff.
But you mentioned Venezuela, and before we got on, we talked briefly about Maduro and Trump and what Trump wants to see happen in Venezuela. He certainly has a Secretary of State in Marco Rubio that would love to see things go down very quickly with Venezuela. We have the naval assets now in international water within striking distance. I think we have some F-35s in Puerto Rico that can respond relatively quickly. And also there was, I read an article recently in the Miami Herald about what a U.S. strike could look like in Venezuela. And it said, while we don't have enough troops in the region to actually conduct an invasion, one of the writers said that what we could see happen in Venezuela is akin to what happened in Iran, and how the U.S. carried out airstrikes, and then essentially got out, destabilize and get out. Do you see the U.S. taking military action in Venezuela? Is that heating up in your view?
Oh, yeah. No, I think, in fact, it's following the same pattern as Iran. We saw before the United States launched the strikes on June 25th, June 24th, there had been a steady buildup of naval presence in the Gulf, a buildup of aircraft in the area. And some of it was designed to distract from where the actual buildup of forces was taking place. That there may have been bases being set up in Azerbaijan but the focus of the world was down in the Indian Ocean. So what we're seeing here is the assembly of a huge naval force. It's got a Marine Marine Expeditionary Unit, 2 of those, which each unit carries about 2,200 Marines. So it's really not a large enough force to, quote, invade Venezuela, but I can see the United States deciding, okay, we're going to launch airstrikes on Venezuela. Again, a war crime. Venezuela is not attacking U.S. forces. You know, I come at this, I teach self-defense with firearms. And while we give people the capability of being able to kill someone else, the instruction is basically the very, very last thing you ever want to have to do is kill somebody. And the only time that you could lawfully use a firearm is if your life was in an imminent threat of loss of life or severe bodily harm, severe injury. Somebody was going to beat you with a baseball bat. If you cannot get away, if you can't back off and set distance between yourself and the attacker, then and only then can you shoot them. But that's not the rules of engagement the United States is embarking on. We're saying, we don't like how you look. We don't like how you talk. We don't like what we see. We think you're bad, therefore we're going to kill you. This is outrageous. And what's unfortunate is the vast majority of Americans have become inoculated, immunized to this kind of brutality on our part, where we become the major terrorists in the world because we're killing civilians. The use of violence against civilians for political purpose is the very definition of terrorism. And that is exactly what Donald Trump is engaged in attacking these boats that he claims are carrying narcotics. That's not an attack on the United States.
Well,
and let me just say, I can talk about this. I've got some authority on the whole fentanyl issue. My 39-year-old nephew died in a bathroom 60 feet from me 2 years ago from a fentanyl overdose. So it's not like I'm pretending it's not a problem. It is a problem. But the problem is not Venezuela. And Donald Trump is lying about this. But it's not just Trump. Look at all the military officials that are going along with this. They should be resigning and protest. We're not going to carry out an unlawful order like this. This is not a valid, legitimate military target. These are civilian targets. Shame on them. The 4 stars, the 3 stars, the 2 stars, the 1 stars, the colonels. Not a single one of them with an ounce of integrity to stand up and throw the penalty flag on this.
What happens? What happens to them if they did that? There has to be some kind of a career concern, right?
Yeah, you lose your career, but you keep your honor intact.
Do they lose their pensions too? If they, like, as somemeone who doesn't know, would you lose your pension too? Would you be completely out?
Potentially. Yeah, they're taking a risk. And see, that's where we want to talk about how brave they are. They're not brave; they're cowards. Because what we're doing, and this kind of military buildup to provoke a war where Venezuela is not attacking us, and the ones who were facilitating the arrival of Venezuelan gangs in the United States, that wasn't Venezuela. Those were non-governmental organizations, many tied to pro-Zionist groups. Mayorkas in particular. Some of the groups that were involved, he had direct ties to prior to becoming, Homeland Security under Biden.
Were you as surprised as I was when you saw General Petraeus interviewing the new Syrian president, who once was a leader of Al-Qaeda? He was in New York, and they met me. And I know Petraeus was or is still with KKR, the major private equity firm.
Yeah.
Were you as surprised as I was at seeing that? And were you disgusted?
Well, I was. To be surprised would be to assume that General Petraeus had an ounce of integrity within him, which he doesn't. So no, it doesn't surprise me that he'd turn into a prostitute for $1. Are you kidding? But the irony of it was certainly rich, because it was under when Petraeus was running around in Iraq. Jelani was part of what we know as ISIS, the terrorist group that was set up by al-Zarqawi. And al-Jelani was one of the foot soldiers in that, cutting off people's heads, attacking Shia Muslims, attacking U.S. forces. Now, again, I don't consider attacks by ISIS on U.S. military targets as terrorism. Again, the definition of terrorism is the use of violence against civilians for political purposes. What would you call the use of violence against guys in uniform that are in military? We call that war. Okay? So stop trying to mingle the two. But then al-Jelani went on to head up a new group that sort of separated from ISIS, but they were equally as violent, al-Nusra. And then he formed Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, in retrospect, probably with the help and encouragement of my former outfit, the CIA. But for a couple of years, and the country reports on terrorism issued by the State Department, my old office, it's now called the Bureau of Counterterrorism, they listed Hayat Tahrir al-Sham as one of the top 10 terrorist groups in the world. And they ranked it based upon number of attacks and number of people killed. Yeah, that's who Petraeus was meeting with. And hey, you getting enough sleep? Yeah.
That was painful.
Jesus.
People went on social media and were like attacking that, saying, "Oh my God, he's worried about this person's sleep patterns."
At least Petraeus didn't perform an act of fellatio on Jelani. Or Al-Shara. Al-Shara.
Oh, that's his new name. That's the new name. Yeah. Right.
Got him a haircut, a beard trim, and a new suit. And man, he's now one of us.
What keeps you up at night the most, Larry? When you think about all these world issues, what do you think is the most dangerous for America right now unfolding in the world? Would it be war in Venezuela, which leads me also to question, would Russia and China just sit back and watch the U.S. carry out this kind of military attack on Venezuela?
Well, I don't know the particulars of it, but I know that the Venezuelan legislature last week approved a security arrangement, an agreement with Russia. So now I don't see Russia necessarily as being willing to use what's going on in Venezuela as a pretext to get into a fight with the United States, particularly on this side of the world, because that's not Russia's thing to project that kind of military force. I think the Russians understand that the United States strategy is to try to create crises that will compel Russia to intervene. And so Russia is being very cautious about that. The problem with the United States, we demonstrated, we didn't learn it with the Houthis. 7 weeks of bombing, missile strikes by us, did not eliminate the Houthi capability on the ground. Our bombing of Saddam Hussein, whether in 2003 or 1991, that didn't eliminate the threat on the ground. You ultimately always have to put troops in on the ground if you're going to take control or try to take control. And we've even seen that even if we do that, it doesn't guarantee that we get control. So the risk that if the big risk I see right now is Donald Trump. Trump is the danger because he is so weak and he's not committed to being the peace president, despite his claims that he's settled more wars than Jesus Christ and God the Father put together. Okay. Yet he is adopting policy positions or being bamboozled into accepting suggestions and recommendations that when those things blow up in his face, he tries to back away and say, oh, I didn't know. I had nothing to do with that. It wasn't my idea, etc. But he's the one that basically set the table for that to happen. And so right now, you've got the potential for conflict touching off in Venezuela, an expansion of the war in Ukraine to involve NATO countries, the attack on Iran that's going to lead to a retaliation against Israel that will threaten the very existence of Israel, and then our heated rhetoric against China. It's akin to putting a kid in a shed, a wooden shed, and there's open gasoline cans and fireworks, and you give him back some box of matches and say, light them up there. It's just a matter of time before the explosion goes off.
What's taken so long, Larry? Why hasn't it happened yet? I mean, all the escalation, all the weapons the U.S. gave to Ukraine, they're confiscating Russian assets. Now they want to liquidate some of these assets. The EU, they stole the interest on these assets. Now Trump wants to try to collapse the Russian economy. At what point do you think Russia is just going to say, enough with this? We're not doing this anymore.
Well, thank God for the patience of Vladimir Putin and his National Security Council. They would have every right under international law to have retaliated and escalated the war and extended it far beyond Ukraine, but they haven't. They appear content with their current strategy, which was laid out from the beginning, one of attrition to demilitarize the Ukrainian army. That's what attrition means. And that's exactly what they're doing. We've seen now over the course of since January of this year, 2025, the Russians and Ukrainians have exchanged the bodies of dead servicemen. So the Ukrainians turn over dead Russians, the Russians turn over dead Ukrainians. The average exchange for every dead Russian that's returned to Russia, the Ukrainians are getting 40 dead Ukrainians. So that shows you the actual loss on the part of Ukraine. Now, some will say, oh, well, wait a second. That's just because the Russians are moving, their lines are moving forward so fast. Now, listen to this. The lines are moving forward so fast that Ukraine doesn't have time to recover their dead. Well, wait a second. Didn't Donald Trump just tell us, and that the same that General Kellogg did, the same that David Petraeus did, is that the Russians are losing. They're barely capturing any territory. They're moving so slow. But now they're telling us, oh, no, they're moving fast. We can't stop them. They don't have time to pick up the bodies. I mean, it's such a load of crap. I mean, and it's inconsistent across the board. And again, this notion that they're going to collapse the Russian economy. Okay, let me play a numbers game with you. Right now, which economy is growing at 1.8% and which economy is growing at 1.5%? Russia or the United States?
I'll say Russia's growing at the 1.8%.
Correct. And who's growing at the 1.5%?
U.S.
That'd be the U.S. Debt to GDP ratio. The United States has 126% debt to GDP. That means we're spending a lot more money than we're making. Russia's debt to GDP ratio is 19%. Okay. Russia's unemployment is 2.3%. The United States unemployment it's gone up to like 4.4, 4.5%. So if I was God and I could say, Ed, my son, I'm going to give you the choice. You can be president of either country. And based upon the economic conditions, which country would you rather be president of?
Well, based on those statistics, it looks like Russia has,
Yeah. So if Russia's on the verge of collapse, oh my God, what does that mean for the United States? Now, part of this is predicated on saying, well, we're decimating their oil fields, and without oil, their economy is going to crash. Right now, less than 15% of Russia's GDP comes from oil and gas exports. The majority of those go to Russia, to China and India. And China and India are not about to stop importing oil and gas from Russia because they need it for their own national security needs. So that's not going away. So the notion that Russia's economy is going to collapse because of the oil industry, it's not. It's an important part of their economy, but it's not the one that you take it away, the economy falls apart. Russia covers 11 time zones, has the most natural resources of any country in the world, and frankly is able to be completely self-sufficient. They don't need a single damn thing from another country in order to have a functioning, healthy economy.
Last question for you, Larry, if you can indulge me. We have Pete Hegseth, who's the head of the Defense Department, and I would say there's probably not an administration official in Trump's cabinet, who does a better job in spreading Trump's brand of messaging. He looks to me like an absolute Trump diehard, and he says what Trump would say. He sounds a lot like Trump. So I understand why he's in the position. He's a great ambassador for what Trump wants to relate to the public. He talks about warriors and things. But if push came to shove and we ever did have to defend Taiwan, for example, or if we ever felt compelled to defend Taiwan or attack Russia or attack Venezuela, who calls the shots in the U.S. military? I can't imagine Hegseth sitting down with maps on his desk and saying, "Here's where to position forces." Like, whose call would that eventually be, Larry? Would it be Hegseth?
Well, in theory, it depends on which theater it takes place in. So if it's in Central Command or European Command, the first point person on that in terms of recommendations, what to do, would be coming from that commander and his planning staff. They would go back through the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the JCS. So Hegseth would actually be sort of peripheral to this entire process. He'd have some input, some influence, but one of the real weaknesses of the U.S. military structure is we don't have a complete general staff. And when I talk about general staff, I'm talking about a military authority that has command and control over Air Force, naval, ground forces. In the United States, we still very much the control over the Army rests with the general who's the head of the Army. His forces are then distributed to these very different regional commanders, the theater commanders in chief, theater sinks. So the same for the Marine Corps, the same for the Air Force, same for the Navy. So you don't really have an integrated whole in terms of affecting a military response. That's one of the things where the Russians have a clear advantage over us, and they're able to really integrate all of their sea, air, land forces into one objective. But Hegseth would not be the one calling those shots, I don't believe.
Larry Johnson, former CIA analyst and writer at Sonar 21. I'm going to put a link in this bio for the video. Larry, thank you so much for joining the Trends Journal today. I really appreciate it.
Hey, Ed, it's always fun. We scare the hell out of people, but
but they need to know, because they're not getting this on the normal news outlets. Yeah. They're not,
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Larry, thank you so much.